You have to
Recording.
talk loud,
I'm rolling.
Okay.
even though I have my hearing aids in.
I'm sitting here with Gene Weiss on May 23rd, 2012 in Wyckoff, New Jersey. Why don't you tell me a little bit about where you were born, growing up, your parents?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, the younger of two daughters. I was raised without a father. I had no father from the time I was about 6 years old. My mother was, I would say, not particularly observant Jew, but we were Jewish. She belonged to Hadassah. She had kosher chickens fried chicken on Friday night. And I think, I've often thought that I was born with Zionism in my neshama. From the earliest time I remember, I had a dream that someday there would be a state for Jews like there was for every other nationality. And when I was about 12 years old, a friend invited me to a meeting of a, quote, Zionist youth group. I went up to the meeting. There were a lot of kids there my age, and they were singing Hebrew songs and doing different Israeli dancing, and I liked it very much. When I was there, they gave out J&F pushkas for us to fill and bring back to buy land in Israel. Coming from a home of very modest means, there was no way that my mother could help me in this endeavor. So I decided to go with a friend on the subways of New York. I go from car to car at about 4:30 in the afternoon, when the Jewish garment workers were coming home, and try to fill my J&F pushkas. I did this. I went on the subway. I went from car to car, and in each car I made a little speech. Please help establish a Jewish national home in Palestine. And at that time, a penny was money, a nickel was more money, and a quarter was unbelievable. And so everybody filled my pushkas, and I brought them back. I graduated.
What was your sister's name?
My sister's name was Blanche.
And she's older than you?
She was my older sister, yes.
And your mother was from where originally?
My mother was from Austria-Hungary, which later became Poland.
And when did she
After
come?
the First World War.
When did she come to the United States?
She came to the I don't know the year, I could probably figure it out, but she had 3 brothers here who had a butcher shop, not a kosher butcher shop, and they needed a sister to keep house for them and cook for them and take cash for them in the store. So they sent for her. I believe she was the eldest of all the children who were still remaining in Europe. And she came here, and when I think about it now, I realize that that saved her life from the Holocaust, because the rest of the family stayed, and most of them
When
were lost in the Holocaust.
Is that where she worked, in the butcher shop when
She-
you were growing up?
Pardon me?
When you were growing up, is that where she worked?
No, she didn't work there when we were, this was prior to her getting married. This is when she first came here. They sent for her for that reason. Then she got married, she went back to Europe. That's another story. She got caught in the First World War, and she had to walk, she used to tell me, miles to get from the European side to the American side in order to come back home. And after she got married, she was home, as I recall.
Did you go to,
I went to regular school. I graduated, I got out of high school at the age of 16. I was in rapid classes. And I went to some college, but circumstances at home were such that I had to go to work and help my mother because there was no father to support the home, and I went to work.
when you were growing up, and you said that you felt like Zionism was something that was in your neshama,
That's right.
what do you remember? Did you remember anybody talking about Zionism or Palestine when you were growing
No.
up?
I don't remember. I remember there were some kids who felt as I did, and but I don't remember anyone feeling the passion that I felt, and I couldn't explain it even to myself, but it was there. And when I got out of school, I was a costume design major, and I got a job designing and setting up bridal parties. But this job was on the Lower East Side of New York, near the Bowery. And my mother was not happy that I was working near the Bowery after dark at night. So I got another job. I was going for another job on 14th Street, and I got sideswiped by a car. I was caught in the middle of traffic. And my physical injuries were not that great, but from the shock, I lost my power to walk, my ability to walk. And I was home for about 3 months, learning to walk again. And during this time, I had a lot of time to think. And while costume design was wonderful, I was pretty good at it, I felt there was something greater and more important in the world than my designing dresses, and that maybe I should do something about it. So when I went back to work, I decided to look for a job with a Jewish organization. I found a job with an organization called the American Jewish Conference
What year was this?
in New York.
What year was it? Do you remember?
No. Well, I would say probably 18. Yeah. I must have been about 20, maybe. Probably 18, 19, say 20, 87. So about 67 years ago. You want to do the math?
So that would have been about 1945 or so?
Well, the state was established
In 48.
in 48. It could be about 44, 45, yes.
Was the war over yet?
Pardon me?
Was the war over yet?
Was the war over yet? The war ended when? Second World War.
45, I think.
Because I also worked as a waitress at the USO during that time.
Okay, we can.
Years.
Okay, that's all right.
Probably, I don't know if the war
That's all right. You can.
war was over. I would say, the rough guess, probably it was.
Okay.
But it didn't influence me at all because I was doing something else.
Okay.
I mean, I worked as I say, as a waitress at Temple Emmanuel during the Second World War, serving lunch to soldiers and you know, being helpful, whatever. Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
So I got a job with the American Jewish Conference. This was the overall organization of all the Jewish organizations, the American Jewish Conference, the American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith, all of them, as being the spokesperson for a unified Jewish community in favor of a Jewish national homeland. And my boss, who I worked for, was a man named Cy Kennan, K-E-N-E-N. His initials were I-L Kennan. And I worked there, and when the case before for the partition plan was before the UN, when was that, 1945?
47.
It was in 47, then the war was over,
Yeah.
I would say. When the case was being presented before the UN, the Jewish agency, whoever, asked my boss to come over to the Jewish agency to be the PR person for them during this time. And he took me with him. The Jewish agency at the time was located at 16 East 66th Street in New York City. The staff was about 8 or 9, mostly young kids like me, who had the same fire in them as I for a Jewish state. We got paid very little, if anything, but we were full of idealism and ready to work. At the time, I can remember Teddy Kollek used to come into the office, the former mayor of Jerusalem.
Do you remember what he was doing then?
I know now what he was doing there. We had a code room in the building. It was a brownstone house, like a two-family and a basement brownstone house, and we were on the first floor. There was a second floor, but never went up there. And we had a code room, and Teddy Kollek, I later found out, was head of the Haganah. Israel did not become a state by some miracle. A lot of people in America many of them unnamed, some I remember, worked tirelessly, in many ways, which we don't have to go into, to see the reality of the state. I remember the Reform movement and the American Council for Judaism were two groups that were opposed to the founding of the state, to establishing a state. They were worried about dual loyalty and whatever. To the great credit of Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath, who was, I think he was maybe from Cleveland, who was the head of the Reform movement in America, who brought the Reform movement into our group, so that we had the Council for Judaism never came in, and they were a very small group. I believe they were mostly German Jews, and they were not a significant number. At any rate, when I was at I backtracked there for a minute, but I want to get it all in the story. So my Cy Kennan was the PR person at the Jewish Agency, and then when Abba Eben came, and the UN used to call us at about 4:30 in the afternoon when they wanted us to present our case. Of course, when they call you at 4:30, you have to stay till 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock. We had no night staff. We barely had a day staff. So those of us who were there during the day worked all night to get this accomplished. The reason I became Abba Eban's secretary was because I was the only one who knew shorthand. They were looking for someone who knew shorthand, and I knew shorthand. So there was a small ante room, and Abba Eben sat at the desk. Next to him was Moshe Sharet, sometimes Rabbi Stephen Weiss, Nachum Goldman, and whoever was in town at the time. And Abba Eben would dictate his speech to me. I would take the dictation. I would transcribe it on an IBM Selectric typewriter and give it back to him. And then he would look at it, make corrections. Sharet would look at it, everyone would look at it. This would make corrections, this correction. And sometimes I even threw in one or two of my own. And we typed it, retyped it. And then, had I thought of it at 3 and 4 in the morning, I should have saved all those drafts. History would have told you to do that. But at 3, 4 in the morning, after working from 9 the previous morning, I just wanted to, we just knew we had to get it done and get it out there by 9 o'clock in the morning. It's one of the things I do regret. At any rate, when it was all finished, and one of the other girls her name was Dorothy, as I recall, put it on a ditto machine. That was a purple, there was no photocopy machine at that time. It was a purple ditto machine. How she got it on there, I don't know, but it was with purple ink. And then we would type that, she would get it on there, and then we would type it on something else, and there were pages and pages, and then someone else would stand there and collate the whole thing, and we would do this maybe 20, 25, 30 times. The purpose of all the copies was to go out to the UN the next day and to give this information of the press release, which was written, I should have said, by Cy Kennan, give the press release to the various reporters for the various newspapers in order to get some kind of sympathetic press for the idea of a Jewish state. I should say that after we finished all our work at 3 or 4, whatever time in the morning, they put us up at a small hotel on East 60th Street called the Hotel 14. It was at 14 East 60th Street. And then we would get 2 or 3 hours sleep, 4 hours, whatever, and we would be back at the office at 9 o'clock. And in my case, often I would go out to the UN and help distribute the press releases and answer any questions that the reporters had.
Do you remember anything else about the hotel? Do you remember anything else about the hotel?
It was a very small hotel.
Do you remember anything else that happened in that hotel, or who the owners were?
No, I don't even know how they picked that hotel.
The hotel was upstairs from the Copacabana, wasn't it?
No.
I think so.
The Hotel 14?
It wasn't near the there wasn't a club there also?
There was a Copacabana, but that I don't think was on the east side. I think it was on the west side. There was a nightclub.
Maybe it was the same owners.
I have
because that was also where did Teddy Kollek, where was his office?
I don't know. He used to come in, go into the code room, and stay there for a while. There was one girl at the Jewish agency who was allowed in the code room. The rest of us were told we were not allowed in there. And she used to go in. I remember her name. You want her name? Or is it insignificant?
I'm curious, yeah.
Huh?
If you remember her name, sure.
Yeah, it was Erica, and it was some odd last name, Groves Pelagic or something like that. Her aunt was very, was involved somehow with the Jewish agency. That's how they knew she was reliable, and she got that job. But he used to come into the code room, but I don't know where he actually lived. I don't know if he lived. He might have been at the Hotel 16.
I think he was also.
Yes, it's possible that we used that facility, and maybe somebody knew somebody, so that but I have no knowledge of that. All I know is when we finished working, whatever time in the morning, we used to go over there, get some sleep, and come back in the morning. And this wasn't, I would say, this was a couple of times a week during that time. I would like to say what I told you before, that I do not think we would have been successful as we were if it hadn't been for Abba Iban. Whoever chose him to come here to represent us was an absolute genius. He was eloquent, he was non-confrontational, he carried himself and spoke in a demeanor that was respectful to all, and as a result he got the respect of all. There is not enough I can say in praise of him and his work. And I've been asked many times if he wrote his own speeches, and I can tell you, yes. He wrote every word. I know because I took it all down. I don't know if there's anything else I'm missing.
Do you remember who else worked? Who else worked in the office? It was Cy Kennan.
Well, Kennan worked there. We had a staff. Erica worked there. There was a guy named Sam Block. There was a guy, someone named Max, what was his name? But most of them young. Some of them, there was a woman, Helene Blumkin, who used to sell Israel stamps and first day covers. And she started out as a volunteer, but I think later on she became an employee. There were all kinds of officials, leaders of the Jewish community coming in and out. There was Stephen Wise of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. There was someone from Omaha, I wish I could remember his name, who was in the office all the time. There were people from Teaneck. I mean, it was like the center of all of activity.
Do you remember somebody named Rudolph Sonnenborn?
Rudolph Sonnenborn. That name is familiar. Can you refresh my memory?
There was a group of wealthy businessmen that they used to meet. They called themselves the Sonnenborn Institute. He lived in Manhattan, and I think they met in his home. And these businessmen supported. They put all the money that was used toward all the activities of trying to get surplus from after the war to get it to Palestine.
You mean guns and stuff?
Guns and bullets and boats and airplanes and aircraft carrier they tried to buy.
To Haganah.
Yeah.
Yes. And Rudolph Sonnenborn. There was somebody from Teaneck. What was his name? He was a businessman, and he was also involved with that. I believe that's accurate.
How about somebody named Eli Shalit?
No.
How about Chaim Slavin?
Chaim who?
Slavin or Slavin?
Slavin, no. We had two Israelis there. Zvi Caspi, who was, I don't know what Zvi did, but I also worked for, what's his name? Gershon Askulai. He was with the Jewish Agency in Israel, and he came to bring young people to settle in Israel. And I used to work with him getting the kids their passports and seeing them off at the plane and so on. But who was it in Teaneck? His wife wrote for the Jewish Standard. He was another businessman who, yes, that's why I say a lot of Jewish businessmen were involved. There was one from Omaha, I wish I could remember his name. He was there all the time.
How about Ralph Goldman? Does that name ring a bell?
Who?
Ralph Goldman.
Mel Goldman?
Ralph
Ralph?
Goldman.
Ralph Goldman.
Maybe from Boston.
He could have been one of the was he a businessman?
No, I think he was, I don't know, he was involved. I guess there were all kinds of activities that were going on. How about Moshe Tov? Maybe a South American.
Yeah, there was someone from South America used to come in the office.
That was part of the UN mission, maybe?
No, the UN mission was basically who I said as I when the case was being presented. Later on, after the UN recognized Israel and we had a mission, that was a later time.
But this was before, while they were trying to prepare the case. So was Abba Hillel Silver also involved?
He used to be in the office, yes, from time to time. Stephen Weiss more. But Charette was always there. Nachum Goldman. I think it was Silver who was the other one. There were about 4 of them who were involved in helping write, writing and whatever. But Eban wrote it all. They corrected it and added to it, subtracted, but it was all his.
Do you remember November 1947 when it was time for the vote? Do you remember what happened? Or it was Thanksgiving. And then the vote, that was the big day.
Yes. I don't remember the actual vote. I do remember when the state was declared by Ben-Gurion, the Declaration of the State of Israel. When I memorized it at one time, and he said the establishment of a Jewish state to be called Israel. That came over a ticker tape. There was no machine or anything that could receive it. It was a ticker tape. And I took that ticker tape off the machine and gave it to Cy Kennan, and he wrote the press release that released to the world the fact that there was now a Jewish state. I do not recall the UN vote. Isn't that strange, having worked for it for... I may not have been there that day.
It was Thanksgiving weekend, and the vote was on Saturday night. November 29th, 1947.
Yeah, well, you see, it's possible that we didn't know when the vote would be. I don't know who was there if it was a Saturday night, because no one was in the office, and nobody knew about it, I'm sure. I don't know, was E-Band there?
Yeah, he was there at the UN. It was supposed to be before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
But then they didn't know if they would get enough votes, so
yes.
they managed to convince them to delay the vote, and they kept trying over Thanksgiving to get another couple votes. And then the vote was Saturday night.
Well, that can explain why I wasn't there.
Right.
I wasn't there. But
how long did you work there?
I was trying to figure that, from about 45 to 50, 51. I was married in 50 and continued working there. And then my husband was transferred to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and so I had to leave.
So you were there when the state was declared and they
Yes.
opened the UN mission. Where did your offices move?
What?
Did they move your office?
No. The office was stayed at 16 East 66th Street. I sent Jeff to look and see if the building is still there. It isn't. But we were, the last day I was there, we were at 16 East 66th Street. Later on, I would assume the mission moved because they had other requirements. You know, they were no longer, a small operation. Now they were a regular mission, so that would, necessitate some kind of move to larger quarters, because the building we were in, we were just on downstairs, and then the flight of steps up, and we were all upstairs on the one floor. And everything went on there. It was a very small operation for such a large undertaking.
Do you remember feeling at the time like you were part of something very important that was going on?
Do I remember?
At the time, did you feel like you were part of something that was very important?
I felt that I realized how can I say it without fumbling all over the place? I didn't realize the magnitude of what I had been involved in. I knew that I had accomplished in my lifetime what I wanted, but the magnitude of it affecting the world and the significance of the greatness of it, I did not realize. In fact, I did not even, members of my family didn't even know where I worked. I tend to be modest in things I do, and I never grasped the enormity of it. My son, when he knew about it, of course, and when he got older, he knew the magnitude, he realized it, and he made me aware of the fact that I had an obligation to history to tell the story, and I've accepted that judgment. I think he's right, and I probably would have come to some of this at some point myself. And when I told friends and family, cousins and so on, they're all very surprised. But that's the way it was. I wasn't, and also you have to realize that a lot of what we saw, we didn't talk about. a lot of what we read we didn't talk about. I mean, you know, you understood that what was going on in many cases was stuff that nobody should know, and so you kept your mouth shut. And I guess resulting from that, I just didn't say anything about anything, and that way I was, you know, sure that I wouldn't spill any beans that should be spilled. Not that we were building bombs or anything, but there was, you know, like Teddy Collar coming in the office and things that were going on that I suspected and thought were happening. And nothing subversive or anything, but it just, I just was not that kind of person to say, oh, I worked for Aryeh.
Did you know anything at the time about the guns that were being purchased and?
No, I didn't know anything about guns. I knew there were a lot of businessmen involved and a lot of people doing a lot of things, but I would rather not have known.
Do you remember any of the speeches or letters or that you typed for Aryeh, that anything that was really?
The only thing I have is, as I say, I'm very sorry that it was that I didn't save some of his speeches, because I would have loved to have had them. But I do have a document. Rabbi Stephen Weiss sent to Harry Truman, thanking him for recognizing the State of Israel. And I kept the original, and I typed the message and sent it via Western Union. And I have the original message from Stephen Weiss. You've heard of Rabbi Stephen Weiss? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, that I have. But Aryeh's speeches, they all went copies and distributed. So stupid.
No, but do you remember? Do you remember when you heard any of them or read any of them saying, "Wow, this is really what he's saying here is so important," or anything that struck you as?
Everything he wrote, every word was measured. He was a brilliant, brilliant man. You were like awed by what he said, because he always found an angle. He always found a nuance to present it in a different light, in a more favorable light. And of course the Arabs didn't want any part of it. And that's why we have the mess we have today, I guess.
Was he a good boss?
Huh?
Was he a good boss?
He wasn't like a boss. We worked together. He never raised his voice, nothing. He was, remember, I was working till 2, 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
After working from 9 in the morning.
Right.
So I was going like for 18 hours. And he could have taken a nap maybe during the day or something, but my job was to be there 9 in the morning. And I was.
Now, you didn't get to visit Israel until much later.
When I finally got, yes, that's quite unbelievable. Because I used to send the young Chalutzim to Israel and took care of their passports and so on. But I moved to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and I started had a family and had take care of the children, and it just never, I could never find the time to do it until so much later in life. And when I finally got there, and they interviewed me on Israel Defense Forces radio and on TV, they asked me, what took you so long? And when you're living day by day, you don't realize how quick 50, 60 years can pass, how quickly 50, 60 years can pass. My husband didn't have any of the passion I did. Not that many people do, not many people did at the time. There were a group of us. In fact, I gave an acceptance speech for one of the awards I got. And I started off by saying, long before Martin Luther King had his dream, a group of Jewish kids from Brooklyn had their dream of a Jewish state. And there were a number of us, and we worked hard at what it was, but everyone thought we were eccentric. Who would give it to you? How is it going to happen? And you're knocking yourself out for nothing, which didn't deter us 1 second. We kept doing what we thought was right, what we wanted. And for me, the big change was when I left my career in costume design and decided to work for a Jewish organization. And that led me to working for Aryeh. It was an experience I know. At the time, it was a goal. And when we reached our goal, I was happy. But the significance of it and what it is today and what it means to Jews throughout the world is beyond anything I ever dreamed or thought of or could possibly envision. When you're young, you're idealistic. I don't think you have the ability to recognize the significance of everything you do. It's only in going back and looking back at things I can think of, things I did with my mother and so on, that really were insignificant at the time, but which have so much more significance today. And it was the same thing with this dream. It was a dream. I can't tell you where it came from, but it was something I had to follow in order to reach, as it turns out, what was the final destination. When I was in Israel, I went to the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. They had a photographer, and he was following me, and I said, "Why are you following me?" He said, because they told me who you are. So I said, okay. He says, can you please stop crying so I can take a picture of you? I cried from the time I got there to the time I left. And I'm crying now. That this should have been my fate, that I should have been involved in this. If you have any other questions?
I think that what you said was beautiful.
What?
I think what you said was beautiful, and
Well,
I really enjoyed listening to it.
you're very welcome. I'm happy to tell it to you. And if it inspires, what worries me is that the young people today don't, I don't know any, do, I'm sure there must be, who want to work at something and continue the dream. I hope there are some to be involved in groups like Federation and defending Jews wherever they are who are innocent. A lot worries me about the direction of the world. I'm no great genius, I'm just an average American born here, who loves my country. But there are a lot of things I worry about. And I hope the mantle can be passed on to another generation to keep the dream alive.
You set a great example, and I think it's very inspiring, the story that you told. So I'm glad that you shared it with us.
You're very welcome. If it helps somebody to be inspired, then I'll be happy.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Cut.